This is the lecture video 379 through 392. We just got done talking about Franklin Pierce winning the presidency, and with him winning the presidential election, he supports the Young American movement. This is piggybacks off of the Manifest Destiny, but not only now in continental United States, but he wants to push farther outside of the United States, Latin America, Caribbean, Cuba, and it just shows America's willingness to go further and farther out. And specifically with Cuba, there's some problems that arise. Number one, we're going to buy Cuba, and it's already set up as a plantation society, so it's going to become a slave state, which the North doesn't like. The South is willing to fight for it, which the North doesn't want to fight for because they don't want it to be a slave state. So the South is willing to fight for it because it's going to be a slave state. The North isn't. And also you have to realize we were a colony of a major empire, and then now we're going to do the same thing. We're not ready for that. We're not ready for imperialism. We will be, but we're not ready for it yet. So the Ostend Manifesto doesn't come to fruition. William Walker attempts to gain control of Nicaragua with the help of Cornelius Vanderbilt. They're going to take over Nicaragua so that they can build a land level canal. The whole idea is to build a canal there, just like the present day Panama Canal, because of shipping, and they realize it. This just shows even further, without the United States even approval or backing, we are sending Americans are going on their own fruition to make money in these Latin American countries. Stephen Douglas, claim to fame was the Compromise of 1850. Now he wants to start a transcontinental railroad, and that transcontinental railroad route he wants to go through Chicago. And then it eventually will go through Indian-occupied Nebraska territory and continue on through the West. He wants it to go through Chicago, of course, because it makes the most sense, but of course, because he's an Illinois senator and he has a lot of land there and all of his constituents are there. Franklin Pierce is on board with this, so he removes the Native Americans and has their land ceded for the railroad in 1853. Douglas sought congressional approval to set up a government in Nebraska, and when that's going to happen, we're going to have to figure out if Nebraska is going to be a slave state or a free state. It's north of Missouri's southern border, but South is pushing for that. So Douglas comes up with another bill. He's Compromise of 1850, transcontinental railroad. Now he's coming up with the Kansas-Nebraska bill that'll break Kansas and Nebraska into two territories. And in the bill, it supports popular sovereignty, again, allowing the states to choose when they become a state whether they're a free state or a slave state. And Northerners are absolutely outraged because, again, like I stated, it is north of Missouri's southern border, so it shouldn't be able to happen. The very thing that they thought was going to end that was going to end slavery, which was the Missouri Compromise line, is now being repealed in the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And it shows that the South is determined to spread slavery. President Pierce supports this, so the Kansas-Nebraska bill becomes a law. Northerners and Southerners flee into Kansas, trying to gain a majority. Both sides are there. The pro-slavery delegation elects a legislator and passes laws supporting slavery. There was something like 5,000 total registered voters in Kansas, yet 8,000 people voted to be pro-slavery. It was illegal, and that was called the Lecompton Constitution, which ends up getting sent to the Senate. And the Senate, which I'm getting to, hang on, which the Senate doesn't pass. And so they're going to send the bill back to Kansas. Okay? But both sides are willing to fight and kill over this. This is why it's called Bleeding Kansas. Okay? And they fail to pass the the Senate fails to pass the Lecompton Constitution. So in the time frame, by the time the Lecompton Constitution is getting sent to Washington and everybody's fighting for pro-slavery versus non-slave state for Kansas, all these people from Missouri had flooded into the Kansas territory to vote and make it pro-slavery. Well, now they're back in Missouri, but the fighting continues in Kansas. Okay, John Brown massacres by using a longsword and cutting up a bunch of people at Pottawatomie Creek, and he does it in the name of God and in the name of anti-slavery, and he's applauded. He doesn't even get in trouble. He is applauded for what he did, and violence is just rampant everywhere. And journalists call this conflict Bleeding Kansas. But what will eventually happen is when Congress sends back that Lecompton Constitution, they'll tell the state of Kansas to have another vote, and the people in Kansas vote, and it's a anti-slavery win, and Kansas becomes a free state. More and more violence polarizes Northerners and Southerners, widening sectional conflicts. Between 1854 and 1856, Northerners moved into new political parties, and everything kind of gets mismatched and changed up. And this is kind of some problems we had in class about understanding all the different political parties. So let's talk about it. We have anti-immigration feelings also contributed to party realignment. The Democrats try to appeal to the Irish immigrants, but nativists, anti-immigrants, anti-immigration people, and anti-Catholic people, and join what's called the Know Nothing Party. The Know Nothing Party comes out of a secret society known as the Secret Society of the Star-Spangled Banner. And when you're asked if you're part of this secret society, your responses to me is to say, I know nothing. So that's where the party's name comes from. But then it also morphed for political reasons and campaigning wise to say we want know nothing in our country. We don't want anybody else in our country. We don't want immigrants. We don't want Catholics. We don't want anybody in our country. And so the Democrats, the Know Nothing Party, a bunch of different parties are going to nominate people in the presidential election. And you're going to see that in just a minute. The Republican Party is also going to be started out here. They're formed in 1854 as a coalition of anti-slavery Whigs and Democrats and just a hodgepodge group of a whole bunch of different people. We still have the Free Soilers out there. They're going to align themselves with the Republicans, but they're not going to be Republicans yet. Okay, so the presidential election of 1856 really is muddy, so let's follow along here. Okay, because the political party system is fragmented. So we have the Know Nothing Party and Republican parties each nominate a candidate. Fremont is nominated by the Republicans. The Know Nothings can't even stay their own party, and they split into a Northern Know Nothing Party and a Southern Know Nothing Party. The Southern Know Nothings nominate Millard Fillmore, who has previously been president, and the Northern Know Nothings nominate Fremont. So Fremont is nominated by the Republicans and the Northern Know Nothings, while Fillmore is nominated by the Southern Know Nothings. The Democrats are divided, but of course they span the entire country. The Democrats are the strongest party in the South, but there's still Democrat candidates and Democrat Party members in the North. And they nominate James Buchanan, and James Buchanan wins the presidential election of 1856. Then what follows is Dred Scott. Dred Scott's a slave. He is promised freedom by his slave owners. Started out in Missouri, slave state. They start moving to Illinois and eventually Wisconsin. And Dred Scott is portrayed here as an average middle-class man and family. This is not entirely true. He is educated. He was not toiling in the fields. Could obviously, being educated, he could read and write. His wife and himself were maidservant, manservant. They had their own children. And so they sue for that. Dred Scott sues for his freedom. And it eventually makes it to the Supreme Court. When it gets to the Supreme Court, Chief Justice Robert B. Taney dismisses the case and says that African Americans in the northern states are not citizens Therefore, they cannot sue for their freedom. Okay, perfectly logical, legal standing. But then he comes up with two more things. He says the Missouri Compromise is unconstitutional. Where did that come from? And then he also says that the United States of America cannot tell states anywhere in the Union that they can or cannot have slaves. So this opens up a big can of worms. Now, understandably, the not suing for their freedom makes a whole lot of sense because um, then every slave would sue for their freedom. So that can't work. But the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional, and every slave in the North or every state in the North cannot tell people that they can't have slaves is just ridiculous. African Americans strongly respond to the decision, but what can they do? Outrage over the Dred Scott decision boosts Republican fortunes in the North. Okay. Now, the Lincoln-Douglas debates are a series of debates for the Illinois senator position between Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln. And Stephen Douglas is a rock star. He is the man. He's come forth with all these bills we've been talking about. But these debates are held throughout Illinois, and they highlight the differences between the Democrats and Republicans and the North and the South. Okay, the way it works is Stephen Douglas, who is pictured here, would speak first at the first debate, followed by Lincoln, and then Douglas would go again. And then at the next debate position, Lincoln would start, then Stephen Douglas, and then Lincoln again. Well, as he's giving his first speech, Stephen Douglas is giving his first speech, he has to be careful because he's a Democrat, so he can't say he's for slavery, but he has to distance himself from slavery, but he can't say slavery is wrong. So he makes the statement that slavery is a necessary evil. Lincoln picks up on that and just rails on that for his entire time, which makes Stephen Douglas have to come back and rail for slavery, that it's not a bad thing. And so it's back and forth, 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 back and forth. And so it becomes like this place that everybody wants to go see and hear them have their debate. Lincoln makes it interesting. Lincoln doesn't win. He wasn't supposed to win, but he makes it interesting. But the big thing that happens with Lincoln is that he gets the attention of the Republican Party, and he will be the Republican Party's candidate in the presidential election of 1860, just 2 years later. All right, the differences between the North and the South is what we're going to finish up with. Ideological divisions, obviously, between slavery and non-slavery are differently, but the North is so much more urban and industrialized, while the South is agricultural and rural. Okay, so urban, city, industrial, factories. South, rural, aka country, agriculture, farms. The rate of urban and industrial growth in the North is greater than anywhere else in the world in the early 1800s. Industrialize, industrialize, industrialize. Other differences include more violent tendencies among Southerners, a stronger inclination to serve in the military, and a higher illiteracy rate. They also know how to use a weapon. In the South, and you can go out and shoot my dinner. But of course, slavery accounted for many of the differences between the North and the South. Railroad, the North has 20,000 miles of track, whereas the South has 10,000 miles of track, and the North has links. It's almost all linked up with trunk lines, whereas the South is fragmented and has a bunch of different branches. And here's some of the different ones that are listed, the North and South compared in 1860.
Someone just asked if we do the dodgeball thing. I said yes.